Recorded from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, it's the Last Writing Podcast. I'm Adam Dietz. Hey, how's everybody doing? Hope you've enjoyed the first two episodes. This will be the last one I record prior to releasing them, so, if you hate everything, then I'll know, and if you hate some things, I'll know, and if you love everything, I'll know equally in the future. So, this is episode 3. Last week we spoke to Kirsten Grimes on professional writing. That was a good one. Some kind of great actionable items on how to prep for a career in personal writing, or rather professional writing, and just kind of talking about her background, and hope you got something out of that. I definitely did. It was a lot of fun. Before we get into episode 3, I just want to talk a little bit about the Last Writing Journal, which is something I've been hitting on in the past. So in conjunction with the Last Writing Podcast, launching the Last Writing Journal, and that is a publication for fledgling writers, so kind of just want to provide another platform for writers. As of right now, there aren't a lot of limits in what you can't do. I think under 1,000 words is kind of what I'm trying to keep it at. But more information on that can be found at thelastwritingpodcast.com. So I encourage you to go check out the websites and take a look around and get into that submissions tab, because definitely looking forward to seeing some writing. That is for sure. And just check out the website in general. Follow us on Twitter at LastWritingPod and on Instagram. Got an Instagram. Woohoo. At the Last Writing Podcast. Additionally, if you have any emails, correspondence, just want to communicate, reach out, you want to come on the podcast, you want to suggest someone that could, again, you can do that. The Last Writing Podcast at gmail.com. Very available, very much wanting to kind of interact and talk to other writers. So this week, episode 3, very excited about this one. Talking to Alex Baia. He's a humor writer and the head editor of Slackjaw, which is a top comedy website on Medium, and one of the big comedy websites out there right now online. So we get into a lot of different things. Alex is he's a writer, I said, in his own right. So he's been published in The New Yorker, McSweeney, Slackjaw, among others. So very much a force to be reckoned with in the comedy community. This conversation, we talk about how he got into comedy writing, his work as the head editor of Slackjaw, kind of talking about Slackjaw in general, the ethos of the websites, some common submission pitfalls he sees with writers, the future of online comedy writing, and he gets into as well the importance of writing groups and staying organized, and we kind of end it by talking about his creative process as it relates to one specific piece that he had for The New Yorker. So Alex is a really funny guy, very knowledgeable about comedy writing and writing in general. And he gives quite a few great tips for aspiring comedy writers. So this is a really good one. And I'm going to drop some of Alex's links in the show notes as well. So be sure and check out his stuff and see how funny and talented he is. It's the great thing about talking to people. I've talked to 3 different people, 3 different kind of topics in general, and they've all been talented and knowledgeable and great to talk to in their own right. And this episode's no different. So that'll be the plan moving forward. We'll just continue to talk to interesting writers about their process and from different sort of genres and fields and so on. So far, so good. It's been a lot of fun. And I really hope you enjoyed this one with Alex. So without further ado, here we go. Hey, how's it going?
Hey, Adam. I'm good. How are you?
Good. Thanks for coming on today.
Yeah, for sure. Happy to.
Yeah, nice to meet you as well.
Yeah, good to meet you.
Nice. All right. So, Last Writing Podcast, there's been no episodes released, so you don't really know what you're getting into, but we're just going to talk about process, and we'll talk about, Slackjaw and your own writing and things like that. Does that sound all right?
Yeah, that sounds great.
Sweet.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, you were one of the first people I wanted to talk to. So
Cool.
The first one was an old high school friend, then it was my girlfriend, and now it's you. So you're the first, I'm not going to say real interview, but
okay.
not not
Gotcha.
a friend.
Well, I'm honored. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's just start things out. Can you talk a little bit about, your intro to satire and comedy writing, kind of when you started, how you started, and building your voice early on?
Yeah, sure. So the story of how I got into writing was that I got into comedy. I guess I've always been into comedy in the sense of like loving comedy shows. And I always loved written humor, and I always loved like watching comedic shows. But I really got into doing comedy and performing comedy when I was in grad school. I started doing improv in Austin, where I live, and just completely fell in love with it. It was one of those things where I took my first improv class, and then like within a couple of weeks, I knew, yeah, like I want to do this indefinitely. Like I just want to keep doing this. This is so awesome. So I did improv for like almost a decade. I mean, I only really stopped doing it because of the pandemic. Gotcha. And then I did sketch comedy for a couple of years and I was on a great sketch team in Austin called Comedy Bazaar. And my friends from that troupe now all live elsewhere. They pretty much all moved to LA, except for my friend Nicole, who moved to New York. So that was kind of my first taste of like comedic writing, was writing sketches. And those were very collaborative. Obviously you're writing sketch, so you want to find out like who's going to perform this. Is this going to work for the group? Like how's this going to fit into our show? But that was super fun. And I think it gave me an inkling in my mind that I would like to do written comedic work, and that it would be fun to do it on my own. Like I liked the collaboration aspect of it, but I felt this idea, no, I'd love to write on my own and just see what I could come up with. It was just my voice, just purely me.
Yeah, no, I think I've done a little bit in Milwaukee. I've done a bit of improv since I came up here.
Okay.
And I do feel like the improv scene does kind of lend itself to the comedy writing scene as well. Just a lot of, the same kind of chops being used and so on. And often when I'd come home from an improv class, I'd be so fired up and just feeling sort of high that I'd want to, go put pen to paper.
Nice. Awesome. Yeah. I'm curious, what's do you have a home improv theater in Milwaukee?
Comedy Sports.
Oh, Comedy Sports. Okay. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So basically, okay. Yeah, that's awesome. So yeah, improv, I definitely relate to that feeling of like you have a good show or even an okay show and just feel fired up and you want to make things. So I did that for a long time, and I think I reached a point like several years in, and this was around 2016. I started feeling this feeling in 2016 that I was like, how far can I really take performing in Austin? And I kind of felt like there was sort of a glass ceiling, or maybe a different ceiling. And it was kind of like, look, I was like, if I'm really serious about this comedy thing and about doing this kind of work, I should either move to LA or New York, or I should commit to doing my own thing that doesn't have as much of a limit on how many people can experience it. And I really felt just my personality, my identity, my own preferences, I didn't really want to work on someone else's thing. I was like really ready to do my own thing. I had been in kind of academia. I had been in grad school. I've been working for different companies, and I was like just really ready to do my own thing. And like almost not that I was antisocial. Like I was very into collaboration, and I've been super into writing groups and writing partners, but I just wanted to be accountable to myself and to like create my own thing. And I did feel this primal call to writing, that like that was a thing for a long time that I wanted and that I needed, and that I experienced a little bit of it in sketch. So I just made the decision in 2016 that I was going to do comedic writing. And I said, I'm going to write humor. And I said, I'm going to start a website. So I bought the domain hume.com, which was that's where I posted my early work. And a lot of it is like really bad. But I basically committed to writing one piece every week for a year. That was my initial commitment. I said, I'm going to write one piece a week for a year. And I often would write 2 pieces a week. So I probably wrote like 100 short humor pieces, and probably, I don't know, like not like maybe like 80 of them were terrible, and like 15 of them were maybe okay. And like maybe like 5 of them were kind of good. Mm-hmm. And that was kind of, that was sort of the start. And then eventually that side, I started interviewing other writers too, which is always fun when you're really passionate about something like that. You want to talk to other people who are doing things that interest you. And then I think after like in 2016, I got interested. After I had written a lot of humor, I was like, okay, I've done a lot of reps now. I should really think about improving my writing. And that's when I was really like, okay, I need to like get into writing groups and get feedback and like sharpen this up and try to publish it in places where people would actually read it.
Have you found that the writing groups have have helped you grow? I've never really been in a writing group or done anything like that. I was in grad school, but that's not, you're grouped together, but it's not a writing group per se. But have the groups helped you?
Yeah, they've been immensely helpful. It's probably like, to someone who's writing short humor, it's probably the single greatest thing I would recommend to improving is being able to get routine feedback from people who have similar goals and who, you think are in a position to give you feedback. So you want to be in a group of people that you like, that you, just like enjoy talking about comedy with, and whose taste you respect. I think they don't like I don't think the group has to be, I think it's fine if people are all beginners, but I think you should like the people you're in the group with, and you should like have some respect for their taste in comedy. And I think if those two things happen, and also like be in a group of people who are like responsible, because writing groups, you can get people who are flaky.
Right.
And that's fine. Like, that's the way people are with a lot of comedy and creative endeavors, is they're like, oh yeah, this sounds amazing. And then they do it for 2 weeks and then they kind of flake off or just like disappear. They can't be bothered to actually sit down and write something. So when I was initially creating my writing group in Austin, I tried really hard to like find people that would show up every week. And like, I think the initial thing I had was like, let's make sure that everyone at least writes one new thing a month. So yeah, that was being in a writing group in Austin was super important for me, super helpful. And a lot of the pieces that I created, like I'd say, 2017, like more at the beginning of my short humor writing career, the ones that were actually good were really because I got feedback. That was one of the most important things to help me get better, was just getting outside, getting out of my head and getting outside readers who could say, hey, this is what I think works here, and this is what doesn't work. So yeah, that was super helpful. Definitely one of my top recommendations.
Awesome. So 2016, you started the website Hume, and then kind of transitioned. 2018, Slackjaw starts, and Slackjaw is a daily humor publication on Medium. What were the origins of that, or what caused the transition from Hume to Slackjaw, and kind of what went into just the process of starting that?
Yeah, it was really an accident. It was not intentional. Basically what happened was, when I started this website Hume, I didn't really know what I was doing necessarily. I didn't really know what I wanted. I was just like, I'm going to just do things that seem cool and just put it all on the site. Like, I'm going to interview people and I'm going to write things and I'm going to like maybe write about humor. And it didn't necessarily fit together in a coherent way, but it was fine because I was like having fun and posting things. Right. Now, Slackjaw came along when I thought, because at the time I was like posting things on Hume. I would submit things to the website McSweeney's occasionally. And I thought it'd be good if there were more places that I could like start publishing. I think I did publish on like Robot, but the site Robot twice. I think that was it. Oh, there was another site I published on, actually, the Higgs Weldon, but they're defunct now. I published like one thing on the Higgs Weldon. I think I like submitted 2 things to them. They accepted one of them, and then they were like, oh, okay, our website doesn't exist anymore.
You caused the end of the website.
Yeah, I think I was like pretty close to the end. So I think after that, I was like, I think that spooked me a little bit. I was like, I should submit to sites that I'm sure they'll like still exist.
Yeah, right. Fair.
Yeah. So yeah, basically, I knew of Medium, and I knew Medium was a large platform, and that it was like kind of a blogging platform. And I knew you could have your own profile there, and you could like grow a following on Medium. So that idea appealed to me, because I thought it'll be nice to be on something where there's like an ecosystem of people that could read your work. So Medium appealed to me. I found Slackjaw somehow. I don't really remember how, but it was kind of like, I think at the time there are a lot of humor sites on Medium now, but I think Slackjaw was the first humor site on Medium. So it was created like in the very early Medium days by this guy, Greg Geldner, who worked with Medium, and he just wanted like a publication for funny writing. And then eventually Hassan and Irving, who were the 2 earliest editors, and Hassan, I guess, was kind of a co-founder, they got on board Slackjaw, and they like they kind of turned it into a real publication. They were the ones who, like in 2018, I think end of 2017, early 2018, they made Slackjaw actually open to submissions. Like they created an email address for it, set for open submissions. Before that, it was this weird thing where it was just like a few people who were on Medium were like added to it and could just kind of write for it.
Yeah.
And it was just kind of this like thing that existed that people on Medium knew about, but maybe other people didn't. And then they said, okay, no, we're going to turn this into an actual submission site. And basically I found Slackjaw. I was like, this is cool. I want to publish on Medium. I got some things accepted there. I think I had like 5 or 6 things that I published there, like in like early 2018. And then I think at some point I asked Irving if he wanted help with the site, and he's like, yeah, thanks. I'll talk to the other editors. And this is Irving Rowan, by the way, a super, super funny writer. He writes for the New Yorker all the time. He gets like published there like once every 4 days or something. And he talked to the other editors at the time. And I think a lot of them were just like people that had been added to write for the site. They weren't necessarily, I don't know, like if they were necessarily interested in like being an editor of the site. It was mainly Irving and Hassan who were actually doing that. And so they were like, yeah, thanks for the offer. We'd love to add you and, have you help vet. Yeah. And basically what happened is soon after I was added, they both got really busy. And so it was a strange situation where I was added and then suddenly I was kind of the only person who was available to do anything. So yeah, it ended up kind of just being passed on to me. And the guy who started it, Greg, was like, it wasn't really his bag. It wasn't his thing. He just kind of started it for kicks, but he didn't want to own or manage a humor site. So he basically just passed the torch to me and said, like, this is yours now. You own it, like do with it what you want. And so I found myself in possession of a humor site unexpectedly. And at that point I said, well, what am I going to do with this? And I just made the decision. I said, I want to grow this. I'm going to get people to help me with it. And then things, started from there. And,
That's wild. Yeah, that's really wild. That's awesome. In terms of Slackjaw and its ethos compared to like a McSweeney's or a Points and Case, what would you say kind of sets it apart, or is its identity?
It's a good question that I think we're still figuring out, because I do think it takes a while for a site to find its identity. Like The Onion, I've talked to Scott Dickers and like read he wrote a book where he talks about the history of The Onion and finding their voice. And I'm trying to remember the name. It's Outrageous Marketing. But it took them like 10 years to really find what The Onion was. Okay. And I think McSweeney's now is different than it used to be. I think like when they kicked off, and like I think they're like now they're 20 years old, or no, they're 21 years old. That site was kind of different then. I think it was like more literary and more kind of like insular and weird. And like a lot of their stuff that they published in the early 2000s, it was just kind of like obscure. Yeah. And it was kind of like most people are not in on the joke, sort of.
More absurdist stuff, it seems like.
I think it was more absurdist, yeah. Yeah. And so, and then I think they became more accessible and a bit more topical, and et cetera, et cetera. So I think we are still finding our voice. So there were a few things I think that came, to happen at Slackjaw that were a result of multiple variables. Some of them were like my personal taste. Some of them were the nature of Medium itself. Some of them were just like the life situation that I found myself in. So one decision I made early on is that we would go for like evergreen humor, and we wouldn't review that much topical. And there were really like 2 or 3 main reasons for it. The first one is I just like evergreen humor more. A lot of topical humor just personally, like I think to each their own. I don't diss anyone else's style of comedy, but it just kind of bores me. And also I don't like, a lot of it I don't necessarily follow, and like reading too much news doesn't do any good for me. So I just kind of made the decision, like, I don't really like this. So there's not really a reason for me to build a humor site that's based on things that don't interest me. So that was the first one. The second one was I was doing it part-time. I have, other work, like I had my own writing that I wanted to make sure to maintain. I have, I'm a freelance marketer as well. That's how I make a lot of my income. And so I'm like, I'm going to be doing this part-time, and anyone that's helping me with it is going to be doing this part-time. It would take a long time for Slackjaw to be a thing that anyone could do full time. And so I knew, look, it's not, let's not assume that any given editor will be in the inbox every 3 hours.
Right.
And I think if you want to build like a topical site, it's more important to be in the inbox really frequently. So there was that. So I just kind of made the decision, I want to focus on evergreen humor. And I think also I made the decision, like, we want to be open to more experimental stuff. So it was kind of like, we didn't have a really specific voice in mind. And it wasn't like, we're going to say, I mean, I think we publish smart stuff and I like smart humor, but I don't think we had a very specific voice in mind. Like, it needs to have this type of style or sound this way, or it's not our thing. So I think we were kind of open. In the beginning, it was like, I think I just said, you know, I'm going to veer strongly towards evergreen humor. And if it's something that makes me laugh and fits the submission requirements of like being under 1,000 words, then let's publish that and let's just see where it goes from there. And I think from there we found a style. I think the site is smart but silly. And yeah, I like that we've allowed a variety of styles to flourish in terms of, like, we've had a lot of illustrated pieces and a lot of pure prose pieces. And we have some people who do comics and illustrations on the site, like Emily Klaus and Andrew Hutchinson and others who are really successful with that kind of thing. And that's totally cool. So yeah, I view it as still like we're still finding our voice, but that's sort of the background of how we led up to what it is now.
Yeah, that's awesome. In terms of like editing pieces and pieces that you receive, what are some of the common pitfalls that you see from submissions?
Yeah. So I'd say there are definitely a few that stand out that are very common things. I think the first one is just, this is such an obvious one, but I have to say it, is just like, read the submission guidelines of the site that you submit to. So it's amazing how many people like will submit a 2,000 word thing to a site that says like, we accept up to 1,000, or they'll submit it into the wrong format. So that's easy, but that, you know, that's only really 10% of people or something like that. So that's the obvious one. As far as the humor itself, I think there are a few big ones. I think making the piece clear, having a clear idea, having a clear comedy idea in the title and in the beginning of the piece is so important, and that trips a lot of people up. I think there are some writers too that maybe are coming from a background of like nonfiction or essays where they think that there's something almost like, I don't know if they think it's beneath them or it just doesn't occur to them to say, here's like what's funny about this and just put it in the title, but they'll be, so, you know, they'll write it more like an essay or nonfiction thing where it's some like unrelated thing. So maybe the title of their piece is like, I don't even know what it would be. It would be like some thoughts about my calendar or something, where you're just like, what are you talking about? You know, or it'll be some weird kind of vaguely funny sounding thing that like isn't really like related to anything clear in the first two paragraphs. So it'll be like, they'll be talking about their travel experiences and they'll be like, this is what happens when a coconut falls on your head, or like, that'll be the title of it. And then like the coconut falling on the head, like won't even be brought up until much later. You'll see how it's kind of like tangentially related. And so oh, this is like a funny part of my story that's sort of related later on. So I'll make that the title, almost as though they're like, it's almost as though they're like titling it more like it's a magazine essay where someone is like reading a magazine and they're going to like read it no matter what, you know? Yeah. Like a print magazine. So yeah, I think that's the first pitfall, is just not giving it a clear title that's going to make the reader who has a short attention span on the internet look at it and go, oh, this is interesting. I'd say the second thing is probably the second most common is problems with escalation, like ending the piece too soon, or basically with a short humor piece, you want a funny idea that's revealed and clarified quickly, and then you want to escalate it in surprising ways, and then like the piece ends. And you want that escalation to feel like it's like continuously happening at every point of the piece, so that like at each sentence and each paragraph, the piece continues to be like interesting and surprising while still in line with what was set up at the beginning. So like one way I was thinking about this recently is like when you in a short humor piece, you want to fulfill the reader's expectations, but you want to do it in a way they don't expect. So it's kind of like you're giving them this note, like, okay, here's the funny idea I have. And then you're taking them on this journey and like showing them things that kind of delight them that they didn't expect. So I think heightening is the second problem that people run into. Sometimes they end the piece too short, too soon, I should say. So, maybe it'll be like they have a funny idea, but the piece just ends after like 250 or 300 words.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like an essay style piece. And then it's just like, it's like you didn't take it far enough. So it just doesn't subjectively feel funny enough. So that's one thing that occasionally happens.
Okay.
The biggest problem with escalation, or another big problem, is just going off focus. It's very hard for writers in general to write a series of multiple jokes that all precisely heighten the same premise. It's very, very tempting to write things that are adjacent or orthogonal, that are not quite heightening that premise, that are like in that universe, but they're not like specifically heightening the exact precise thing that you set up at the beginning. And like, I think every writer does that. And that's one of the challenges in finding a piece. That's one of the reasons that writing groups are so good. Is I think like one of the most important things for me in writing groups has been, when I'm writing pieces, like figuring out which are the things that are actually escalating the right thing.
Yeah.
And like writing group will help me find that out. And then I'm able to like cut away or extraneous stuff. A lot of times you'll find two drafts that they kind of like, it'll kind of be two things. It'll be like a funny overall idea, but it'll kind of go in two directions, and the piece won't really be able to decide which it is. So maybe it'll be like, I'm trying to think of what an example would be. Maybe it'll be like a narrator like giving a monologue about, I don't know, like I'll come up with a random like dumb example. Like maybe it's a monologue like I'm your coworker and I'm mad that you ate my food from the office refrigerator again. Like that's kind of a dumb example.
Classic. Yeah.
Like an improv show or whatever. So it's a dumb thing. And maybe like part of the piece, the coworker becomes like increasingly psychotically violent. But in other parts of the piece, they're like talking about something totally different. Like they're talking about not the psychotic violence stuff, but they're talking about like how they're afraid that their mom will be mad that like they didn't get to eat the lunch that was packed for them or something. I don't know. Maybe those are funny and those could coexist together. Yeah. But it's kind of like they'll have sort of two different games and they'll try to play both of them.
Yeah, I think I think your example, like heightening but the wrong thing, is pretty apt. I can think of a lot of examples of me doing that in writing, and just seeing something, writing something, thinking that's funny, but not helping the piece ultimately.
Yeah, but it is hard to, in a lot of times, to figure it out exactly. I mean, I don't know. I sort of suspect that this will like always be true, that even like no matter how experienced of a short humor writer I become, that I'll probably always write off focus jokes and have to go back and edit them. I think it's just challenging because as you're writing the piece, you're kind of still figuring out what is the subtext like. I mean, if you have a really clear title, you know what the premise is, you know what the idea is, but you don't always know exactly how you're going to execute it. So I think it's very, very commonly challenging, I think, to a lot of writers, even experienced ones, that you're figuring out how to execute it and heighten it as you're writing it.
Yeah. Right. That makes sense.
Yeah.
So I, in terms of just like the landscape of online comedy writing, I've only, I kind of started doing it like last summer. So,
okay, cool.
Pretty late to everything. But, I think from what I've read and seen, like, it seems like, early on the .com kind of bubble, there was a lot of online kind of publications, places to put stuff, maybe more opportunities, maybe some more money, etc. But now there's fewer places. You have to search harder. Different publications will come out with these long lists of places to submit because there's just not very many really. Where do you kind of think things are headed for satire and comedy writing online? It's a hard question to answer, but want to get your thoughts.
I really don't know. I think, you're right that in the early days of humor writing, I think in the early 2000s, like late 90s, early 2000s, The Onion was one of the first online humor sites. I think maybe they were the first because they were in like the mid 90s. McSweeney's was pretty early. And I think there were a bunch of other humor sites that are now defunct that were publishing like literary kind of humor or absurdist humor in like the late 90s and early 2000s. And and then it seems like there was kind of this resurgence, or there was this like new wave of humor writing that did, I mean, maybe I only subjectively feel this way because that's when I got into it. So I feel like historically, oh, when I started doing it, that's the beginning. What a like, you know, egotistical, like megomaniacal way to think about it. It's like, yeah, when I started, that's like, you need to define history of like when I start doing things. That's when like,
yeah, I mean, you're part of the French New Wave. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. You're like, yeah, it was really like me that did it. Where are things going? I really don't know, and I'm like very skeptical of anyone's ability to predict anything. I just think nobody knows anything, and nobody can predict anything when it comes to like how culture will change and what things will be successful in what forms. I certainly hope that, you know, I think it's really cool that in humor writing there are a lot of outlets and there are a lot of ways you can do it. Like you can publish on your own, you know, you obviously don't have to submit to a site. Like you can publish on your own in Medium. You can start a blog. There's other platforms besides, you know, Medium that let you just like easily put your writing online. Now that can be difficult because it's like, where do you find the audience? Who are your readers going to be? But if your stuff is really good and if you're clever with promoting it, I think people can find their audience. And then of course there are a lot of sites that you can submit to. So I hope, one thing that I really hope is that in the near and medium and far history of humor writing, that platforms will grow that continue to pay writers. And that's one of the things that I like about Medium, not to be like a big, you know, Medium PR whore or whatever, but that is one thing that's nice about it, is that you can publish a humor piece and you can get paid, like if your piece does really well, potentially a lot of money.
Yeah.
And that's awesome. And that's hard to do right now. There's very few sites that pay like a significant amount of money. Like there are some places where you can publish and get $20 or $30 or $40. And that's great. That's fantastic. Like that's definitely better than nothing. But compared to the amount of skill and the time that you put into something, I mean, if you write, you know, you might put 10 hours, like if you do 3 drafts of a piece, including the idea, the rewrites, like, and then you get paid $20 for it and you put 10, well, congratulations, you just made like $2 an hour.
Yeah. Right.
I'm not, you know, obviously you're not doing it for the money. Like people who do this, they have other jobs, but I do hope that whether it's Medium, whether it's, I don't know, Substack or all these different things that people have found that are able to monetize things, or there was the guy who, I think he's like the co-founder of Hard Times. He started this consortium where, and I think like Reductress and all these other sites joined. I'm not sure exactly how it works. Do you know what I'm talking about? And
I don't.
They're able, yeah, it's basically, so I'm pretty sure it's the guy, it's like Matt Saincombe. I think this is who I'm thinking of. Okay. He's like one of the co-founders of the satire site Hard Times. And I'm pretty sure him and some other people, they started this basically publishing thing where different humor sites joined. I thought Robot Butt did, Reductress did, Hard Times did, where they could all join together. And then like, it was kind of a membership model. Like if you wanted to read multiple art, like more than a certain number of articles, you would become a member of the overall thing. And then they would like pay out. And it was kind of a way of monetizing it. There was a big thing, I read about it about a year ago. I don't ever know what happened to it, but I kind of remember at the time being like, this is at least in the right direction. Like this is the right idea. Like whether this works or not, I felt good about that because I'm like, you're doing the right thing. Like you're trying to find a way. I mean, ultimately, if something is good, if you enjoy writing, like you should pay for it. Like writers deserve to be paid. And so that is one trend that I'm very supportive of, is let's find ways to pay writers. And if there are models other than just shoving a ton of ads in front of people's face, I'm totally in favor of that. So I think Medium has a good model of like, you pay $5 a month, you can read all this cool stuff. I think that's a solid model. I bet there are other good models too. So I really hope that continues to be explored. And I guess the other thing too is I hope that writers are free to write what they really want in the style that they really want. I don't think you have to be, just because one style like seems popular or seems like this is the direction of the culture, this is what people are talking about. Like you really don't have to, I mean, you want to be aware of what's working. So I don't think you want to just continually write things that like get zero response, that just like stone cold dead silence. Like you want to have some awareness of whether what you're doing is working with your ideal reader. But at the same time, I think you need to write within the domain of things that you actually care about. So it's like finding that overlap, the Venn diagram of, on the one hand, things I actually want to write about that like give me joy, and then on the other hand, things that people want to read about that are going to excite them and make them laugh. And then you find the overlap, and like that's where you should write.
Yeah.
Is in the overlap where it's both of those things. So you're going to get readers and you're going to grow as a writer, but it's also going to be things that you actually want to write about. You're not like selling your soul just to chase some trend. So my hope is that there will continue to be a rich enough landscape that every humor writer can find that non-zero part of the Venn diagram.
Yeah, for sure.
To say it in a nerdy math way.
No, I like it.
Yeah.
So kind of transition into your personal writing and some of the work that you've done. Wanted to, I kind of want to try to get into the weeds and talk about process. And I like to do that with a specific piece per person. So cool. I didn't tell you what piece this is going to be, but I assume it'll be one that you've talked about before. So can you kind of walk through the piece, writing the piece and the submission process for the I'll have kids in a few years when I'm successful and wealthy and when my life is finally perfect. So kind of focusing on where did the idea come from, sort of mutations over time, the editing process, and then working with the New Yorker to get that published.
Oh yeah, sure. So yeah, that piece was pretty recent. So I'm gonna actually pull it up. I'm gonna pull up the draft of it so I can look at the draft.
Yeah, awesome. I think December 1st, 2020 is when.
Okay, cool. Let's see here.
It was very funny. Yeah.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, glad you liked that one. So that piece, okay. So I published a piece right before that was emotionally kind of similar, called I Thought I Would Have Accomplished a Lot More Today, and also by the time I was 35. I'll have kids in a few years. Where that idea came from is I actually, when I published that I Thought I Would Have Accomplished a Lot More Today piece, it got a really good response. Like I noticed that a lot of people were sharing it, like people emailed me about it. Yeah, it was like a piece that did well for me. And at the time, I think I was sort of like, I've always loved absurd humor, and I've always loved zany premises. But I thought I love challenging myself to do things I haven't done before. And I kind of thought one of my challenges that I gave myself was like, I want to try writing things that are a little bit more realistic and vulnerable. So not just like, like I wrote a piece for McSweeney's, this is an example of the polar opposite, called Here at Our Crazy Furniture Warehouse, Everything Must Go.
Sure.
Especially you, Ted. And it's just this piece about this guy who like buys too much stuff at a furniture warehouse, and he's like obsessed with antiques, and all the furniture that he like acquires to sell to customers is all like crazy and no one wants it. And that's the whole premise. And it's like, the premise that is like completely ungrounded from anything I've ever experienced in life. Like I have very little knowledge of furniture. I've like never worked in a furniture warehouse. I know nothing about antiques. It was literally just like a crazy premise I came up with. So I think at a certain point I was kind of like challenging myself. What if I wrote things that were more grounded and just more vulnerable? And that's where the I Thought I Would Have Accomplished a Lot More piece came from. It's just my personal feeling of like feeling that procrastination happens on certain days, and then thinking about like how that reflected my life as a whole. So when that piece did well, I basically thought, what are other just like feelings I've been having or things that I've been experiencing in my life that would be similar to that? And that's a thing that I actually do recommend for humor writers, is like, if you have a piece that does really well and is successful, and maybe that could just mean you finish the piece and you really like it, or it could mean it gets published somewhere and it gets a good response. But I say like, try exploring a few similar pieces. Like try exploring pieces like in that same universe, in that same comedic universe, or pieces that come from a similar emotional place. Now, I don't think that means like when you get one hit, like now you're that person, like you need to just write that piece over.
Yeah, going back to the furniture store again.
Yeah, because like, oh, I really like that. I just need to be a guy who like writes about crazy furniture. Like that's my new thing. Like that would go stale like very, very quickly. But I do like the idea of if you have a success, try like exploring a few adjacent things, and see how that feels. And then maybe you're like, so it's like you're exploring this little island universe universe or this little like archipelago or something. And you're like, okay, cool, I've done enough of that. I'm going to like jump over to this totally other thing now. So it was a case of that. So I basically thought, well, you know, I've been, I was like in my own life, just how old I am. And I'm like, I haven't had kids yet. And this is the thing I've been thinking about. Like, do I want kids? Like, when would I want to have kids? Like, will I meet the right person? Like this kind of stuff. And so it really just came from that very grounded thought, which I think that's something that people in a certain phase of their life, like think about and consider, whether it's, do I want kids, or when should I have them? When is it going to fit into my life? And I just kind of went to the grounded thought. It's like, yeah, it seems like my thought on it is always, yeah, I do want kids, but later.
Right.
And I do think that is like a kind of relatable thing amongst a lot of people, is they're like, yeah. Like, I definitely want kids, but I need to like do all this other stuff first. And then it's like, okay, just take that to its conclusion, is that you make the standard higher and higher. And that was really the whole piece idea. So then at that point, so I thought it was a pretty clear idea. So I probably wrote a draft. I will actually do remember some things that changed about that piece. In the early version of that piece, the narrator was more selfish.
Okay.
So in the early version of that piece, the narrator, like, there were these various lines that were like, oh, I'll have kids later because like now I'm too obsessed with just like reading books all day and like watching movies at night and like being able to like eat my food and not have someone like screaming at me. Okay. Stuff like that. And it didn't really work. Yeah. With the approach of the piece. So I got feedback on that like the funniest aspects of the piece were when the narrator was justifying having kids later because he wanted to be like better for his kid. Yeah, it plays much more earnest, you know, in the more earnest. I got that feedback, so I modified the approach, and then I added jokes about like, oh, you know, I'm gonna like, I don't remember, like, oh yeah, I need to write this best-selling book because like my kid really needs like a literary science dad. So that was, I think, an example of the writing group thing of where I got that feedback and then I took it to heart and I said, okay, I'm gonna, and I got to, you know, I still was keeping some of the jokes I had initially because they worked. So I veered it in that direction. And then I think after I had done this, I think this piece was a very common, like I probably did 3 drafts of it. Okay. There was probably like the first draft that I, you know, showed to a reader or a writing group, and I got some feedback. I probably did a rewrite. I showed it again, got more feedback, like it was almost there. And then I did one more rewrite. And then like the third draft, maybe the 4th draft was good to go. And that's super common for me. I'd say it's very common for me to do like 3 drafts. Okay. Yeah. And then at that point I like sent it off, and the Emma Allen, who's the editor of the Daily Shouts, she liked it and just said, yes, I accept this piece. So that was that. That's awesome. How many, so it's kind of arbitrary, but I always try to ask people this. How many hours do you think you spent on just that one? And I mean, I guess you can count the time you spent sort of considering it as well, but in general. Yeah. That's a good question. I think probably, so let's see, I did 3 drafts. Maybe it was like I spent 90 minutes to 2 hours per draft. Okay. The time thinking about it. I probably didn't spend more than 10 hours, but it probably definitely wasn't less than 7 or 8 hours. I'm gonna ballpark like 8 to 10 hours. Okay. Yeah. That makes sense. And then when you sent it in, you sent it to Emma, who's the editor. There was no further kind of editing process from there, or was it pretty much good to go? No, she didn't have any. So my experience, no, she didn't tell me to make any changes. She did. So this has been my experience at humor sites too. Different editors will be more or less heavy-handed with changes that they make, depending on the site, their own personality, and just the nature of the piece. So she made some edits to it, but they were like minor. Sure. I don't think she changed anything major in the piece. There might have been like some very minor grammatical things that she changed. My experience with the New Yorker has been usually like their edits, but they're usually pretty small. I've never had anything major change. In one piece, she like changed the joke at the end. She like rearranged 2 things so that the punchline at the very end of the piece was different. And it was like the change was like way better. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, so the changes are pretty minor. And then my experience with McSweeney's has been like, I've almost never, from just my experience, other people may have had different experiences because I think sometimes, like I've had friends that submit to them where the editors have asked for more major changes, but most everything I've submitted there, it's either been like, yes, and they just run it basically almost exactly as is, or no.
Yeah, I've had two, and one was pretty much exactly as is, and the other one was significantly, like quite a bit of edits, like a big chunk was taken off in the
Really?
beginning and
Okay.
end. So
Yeah,
I
I've
guess
never
it can go both ways.
Yeah, I've never had that happen. So in the second case, it was probably a case of like the editor really liked the premise, but they're like, okay, but we need to change all these things.
Yeah.
And that happens at Slackjaw as well. Like we'll occasionally get an idea that we really like, but it's like the execution wasn't quite working for us. So there's just, for whatever reason, there are things that we want to see changed. And so we work with them. And I think that's probably more, I think the more common thing I'm guessing is the editor just like overall likes the piece and makes very minor changes, if any.
Yeah. That's been more my experience, I would say, in submitting. But so in terms of the sort of the process you just described with the New Yorker piece, is that kind of your typical process in writing like a, I don't know, 1,000-word, 800-word comedy piece?
Yeah, I think so. So my process starts with, I do take brainstorming ideas very seriously, and I try to do that. I try to spend actual time on that. So I keep a list of, in my notes, I just keep a list of humor premise ideas, and I try to always be adding to your list. So, and then sometimes I'll spend explicit writing time on like, okay, I'm going to come up with like 5 ideas today. And I think having that working list of ideas is super helpful. So I put effort into that. And sometimes I pitch those ideas either to like, you know, like a flat, like the Slackjaw group on Facebook, Flatjaw, or I'll pitch them to friends. And then there are other times where I just have the idea and I just intuitively feel like my gut tells me this is a good idea. You should just write this. And honestly, like I've gotten a few good piece ideas from pitching ideas. At least half of my good ideas or more have just been from like, I'll get an idea and I'll just really, really feel like it's the right idea. And so okay. I won't bother pitching it. So I think if you have a idea that you intuitively feel like, no, this really works, I really want to write this, it's a strong idea, and you kind of know that it's a clear idea, then in that case, I say like, you don't need to ask anyone, just like go for it.
Right. In terms of like measuring success, how do you measure success in your own personal writing or even in a particular piece?
Measure success. That is a damn good question, because I think like every writer should know that. I think one of the first things is, my first measure of success is I try to set tangible goals that only I have control over. Mm-hmm. So one of the goals is just in terms of pure output. So I tend to try to make goals of like an actual number of pieces I'm going to write, or just like finishing certain writing projects in a given month or quarter or year. And I part of what I like about that is like no one else, only I control that. So I have total control over like whether I finish the piece or how much I'm writing. It's just up to my own productivity and work habits. So that's really, I appreciate that a lot. I would say another thing I look at is, am I fulfilling the vision of the kind of stuff I really want to write, and am I challenging myself? So I really want to, you know, I'm a big like self-improvement dork, and I'm trying to constantly hit that next level of like taking my writing somewhere that it hasn't been before, and pushing myself to do something that's just like a little bit outside of my grasp, you know, just a little bit beyond where my abilities are right now. And so I feel a big rush of joy and excitement when I feel like I've done something that I haven't quite done before. And that feels mostly within my control as well, because it's like within each of our control what we decide to work on and whether we push ourselves. And then I'd say the final thing is like, yeah, admittedly, you know, I'm like a human being who is motivated by narrow, superficial concerns of like popularity and people like clapping for them and such. So yeah, like if a piece does well and it like gets a lot of shares and people like compliment on it, or like, oh, you're so funny, then I'm like, oh yes, wonderful, I succeeded. So there's that true, but I try my best to make that like the last thing, and to like think about that the least, mm-hmm. because I do think that can become, I do think ego can be really dangerous for artists. I'm very wary of ego, and I'm also probably aware that my own ego is too big. like always aware, like my ego is too big, like cut that shit down, like shrink that ego, stop worrying about the reaction. So I do try to focus on that process, the habits of writing, the actual amount that I'm writing, and am I pushing myself? And that is still from a very, selfish concern as well. So, I'll look at other things. Like I like being embedded in a writing community and helping other people, and seeing, like I've liked seeing the community around Slackjaw thrive. And that's been kind of my big contribution to the writing community as a writer, has been like helping to grow that site and giving more writers the ability to broadcast their material broadly. So I think that is a nice thing too, to be embedded in the community.
Yeah, that's awesome. In terms of pieces you've written, any personal faves?
Yeah, definitely that furniture piece that I mentioned. Nice. For sure. I would say a piece that I really, really liked, and I couldn't necessarily tell you why. I felt like it was a piece that pushed me to experiment and to do stuff that I hadn't done before, and it was just also really weird. It was a piece I published called Postmodernist Pirate Jokes. Yeah, it's a weird piece. I don't really know if anyone read it, or I'm not sure, but that piece I'm definitely proud of. And then I'll mention one other piece, which is I published on McSweeney's in 2017, called "Our Open Plan Office Failed, So We Are Moving to a Towering Panopticon." That was in 2017. That piece I felt like was it was one of the first pieces that I felt like I had kind of hit a new level, and I was like, this piece is really, I couldn't improve on this. Like I felt like I just worked on it and like rewrote it and just like refined it so many times, and I'm like, this is like the best I can possibly do. Like there's literally not a word I could that is like within my capabilities right now to change to make this any funnier.
That's a good feeling.
I felt proud of that piece because I felt like I really put 100% into it.
Yeah, that's great. That's a good feeling when you look back at something and because so often it's the opposite, where you read something after the fact and you think, well, that could have been different, et cetera, et cetera. But
yeah. And then there's also that effect where it's just if something, there's kind of this annoying retrospective thing where if something gets accepted or published, or if people react well to it, you like retrospectively, I don't know have you noticed that you retrospectively change how much you like a piece just based on how other people react to it?
Yeah, I think, I probably personally put a little too much stock into just general reaction. Like, I guess this was or wasn't what I thought it was, but ultimately that's a kind of foolish endeavor. But yeah, absolutely, for sure.
It might be kind of an ego thing, but I've had that where I'll be like, I'll submit a piece and I'll go in and I'll be like, I think this is a pretty good piece. I think it's solid. And maybe I'll think like, this isn't a great piece, but this is a pretty good piece. And then maybe it gets rejected. I'm like, this is a piece of shit piece. Like, this is a bad piece. I shouldn't have submitted it. Yeah. This piece is crap. Like, I don't know what I was thinking.
Yeah.
And it's like, it didn't change.
No.
It's just that like this one editor was like, no, I'm not going to take this. And then suddenly I like hate it.
Yeah. And I've had the opposite happen as well, where I'll submit something and think like, it's fine. It's good enough. And then the reaction will be the opposite. And I'll think, well, you know what? It was really good, I guess, the whole time. Yeah. I just didn't see it. Wow.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Oh, that's funny. So, working as an editor, you're doing freelance marketing work kind of by day, and you have your own personal writing career. So how do you navigate all of those things, at least those three things?
It is tough, and I've gotten better at it. So I think if you're a writer and you're not a full-time writer, probably even if you are a full-time writer, but most writers do other things. I think you need to manage your time really well. I think you need to be really organized and be able to set priorities and have a habit. So for me, one of the things that has helped the most is just having a habit of like writing every day, even if it's for 30 minutes. And like I said, I'm a big self-improvement dork. I'm an organization and optimization geek. So I'm way into my systems and like my habits and the way I track things. So I have I make commitments and I write them down, and I'm very organized and like systematized about the way I decide what I'm going to be working on and how I'm going to be spending my time. I recently became even more systematized about this, and then I started using something called a time block planner, which is a daily planner where, so basically I'll set plans for myself for the quarter. I'll say like, okay, this quarter what quarter are we in now? We're in April, May, June. Say this quarter, here's what I want to accomplish in my life. And one of those big areas will be in writing. I'll say, okay, the priority is to like do this and this and this and this. And that's what I want to finish this quarter. And then that will help me develop every week a weekly plan where I can look at my week and I can say, all right, I've committed to doing these 5 things this quarter. What am I going to chip away at this week? And then I'll write that down and I'll commit to it for the week. And then in a given day, I will look at that weekly plan. I'll be able to say, okay, this is what I've chiseled off for myself this week. And I will block the time. I will literally say like, okay, in the hours that I'm working today, like whatever, between 10 and 6 or whatever it is, here's what I'm going to be doing with each hour of the day. And I'll make sure that the writing gets in there. And things are chaotic, like shit happens.
Of course.
There will be, some client that I have that needs something or like whatever, I'll get distracted by something. But I found that doing this, like bringing that much intentionality and that much organization to it, for me is better than not doing it. And it like has forced me to be extremely accountable to my goals and my time and make sure that there's always a little bit of forward progress. Mm-hmm. And I will say, I think one thing, I don't remember who originally said this, but there was someone, basically, I think human beings drastically overestimate what they can do in a day and drastically underestimate what they can do in a month or a year.
Yeah.
So it's like we get our eyeballs get big and we think, oh, I'm going to like crush all this stuff. Is like, you can't really do that much in a day or even a week, but doing a little bit every day, like you can do so much in a year. It's insane how much you can do by just doing a little bit every single day. So I try to keep that in mind and not lose like, I think the trouble you can get in as a writer was when you just lose day after day after day where you like get off the habit.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So yeah, that's kind of how I've approached it.
Okay. Yeah. Sounds pretty meticulous.
It's very meticulous, and it's actually gotten more meticulous over time. I'm a big believer in you have to find your own system. Some people really like digital tools. Some people like use these super crazy complicated to do things, like they use like Todoist, or they use like some people use Trello boards for their own personal life and stuff.
Yeah.
I use a program called Things
for
the Mac. It's like a very simple, elegant to do thing. I organize everything with that and I really love it. And then for my daily time blocking, I use a physical planner that I like write my time blocks in. And that I've just experimented with it and found that works for me. So I think every writer should find their own system and like experiment with that and judge it by the results. Judge it by like, okay, I tried the system for 3 months. What was the result? Mm-hmm. Be willing to modify that and just keep like drilling down until the system gets better and better. And you cut all the bullshit out. And my goal was like, I want to cut the bullshit out. I want to cut out like watching YouTube videos that I don't need to be watching, or like getting mad about things that I don't need to be mad about, that my being mad about them like won't improve anyone's life. Mm-hmm. That was a big thing for me, is like I'm wasting time. I'm wasting emotional time on things that don't help anyone. Or like wasting time like watching things or I'm wasting time like scrambling around for client things, like spending 4 hours on something that I could just be really focused about and just crush it in an hour.
Yeah.
And once I was like really deliberate about that has opened up, and I'm still totally imperfect about it, but
of course,
trying to really dial that in has helped me a lot.
Yeah, that dovetails kind of in the next question. So you've actually given quite a bit of advice over the last hour or so, but to kind of summarize it, you talked about writing groups, you just talked about sort of coming up with a system and sort of being meticulous. What other sort of advice would you give to, I guess we'll narrow it down to aspiring, satirist comedy writers?
Yeah, that is a good question. I think some bits of advice. I do think one of them, I'm going to go back to the thing of write for your ideal reader.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah.
So don't just be someone floating in the ether who, if you want to write stuff that gets read and you want to like build a body of work where, you're getting read, your work is, people are enjoying it and it's causing laughter or causing like delight or changes of opinion or anything like that. I think you have to write at that intersection of things that you care about or things that delight you or things that move you or make you angry or make you happy or whatever, with the intersection of things that are working, the things that people are reading and sharing. So I think like find that intersection for you.
Okay. Yeah.
So that would be my first one. I also think about it as like find your ideal reader.
Mm-hmm.
Like write for your fellow traveler or your ideal reader. Don't write for everyone. That's crazy. Like no one can create art that is meant for everyone. That is a recipe for failure, and you'll go insane. You'll sell yourself out. And on the other hand, don't be so myopic and narrow and egotistical that you're like, no one else matters. I write for me. I don't care if a single other person laughs as long as I think my idea is wonderful.
Yeah.
Just like, but how do you ever know if your writing is getting better? So I try to keep it at that intersection where it's like, no, I'm writing for my ideal reader, this person that has this certain specific sense of humor. And it's not everyone in the world. Maybe it's like 1% of all the people in the world. And that's fine. That's still a lot of fucking people.
Right.
So that would be my first one. My second one would be about organization. I think find a habit that makes you productive, whatever that means for you. Be willing to experiment with it and change it, and be kind of ruthless about it. Not ruthless in the sense that you're like not kind to yourself at all, or you're just like, but kind of though. Like don't be too nice to yourself. But basically be ruthless about your routine to where you're actually optimizing and you're maximizing your ability to make good things. Mm-hmm. So that would be another tip that I would have about productivity. My third tip would go back to the writing groups. Find at least one person, or preferably a few people, who's you like their taste and you get along with them, and you can give each other feedback.
Yeah, for sure. And
just get it regularly and consistently. That's going to improve your work. And I think those are my three main ones. If I sat down, I'm sure I'd come up with like 15.
Of course.
More. Yeah. Those are the three off the cuff.
No, that's awesome. Yeah. So what are you working on now? Plugs, anything to direct the listeners to?
Let's see. I've been really interested in the idea of doppelgangers recently.
Okay.
I've been writing not one but two things about the idea of doppelgangers. I don't know. I get like obsessed with things, and then So I was getting a little bit more into short story writing, which has been really fun, and that's more experimental with me. So I'm trying to work on some short stories, and then I keep a list of things that I'm always working on. So I'm also working on some short pieces. And like I said about the whole thing about like writing things within a little like island universe, and then you hop to like a new thing. Mm-hmm. I was kind of doing that with the parenting and kids topic. So I have another piece that's coming out called The Pros and Cons of My Having Kids. So I think that's coming. Yeah. I think that's coming out this month.
Is that a New Yorker?
It is, yeah.
Okay.
And that one was literally like, that came from the same thing, like just how I told you that previous piece like spawned the next one. That next piece then spawned that one. I was like, well, there's kind of a bit of this piece that's like more this idea. And I was like, well, why don't I write that idea? So basically kids and doppelgangers. Okay. And short stories. Oh, and I've been thinking a lot about like abysses, like people falling into abysses.
Oh, okay.
Big holes in the ground. So I was writing multiple things about like big holes in the ground.
Okay. Wow. So you kind of come up with a sort of an idea, and then you'll just sort of like abyss or doppelganger kids, and then just sort of go off in different directions.
Yeah, I just kind of get obsessed with these ideas, which I think is a good thing. I think you should I think writers should give themselves give yourself permission to be obsessed with something, and then just really dig into that weird obsession. Doppelgangers, abysses. There was the whole kids thing, and then I wrote another piece that I actually just finished today, which is called The Dating Code of Hot Bobby.
It's a good title. Yeah, it's a good title.
Yeah, and that one I got from I went on a date with a woman who told me that she had dated another guy who called himself Hot Bobby.
Hot Bobby.
So I immediately when I heard that phrase, I was like, that's a winner. Like that's a winning. Hot Bobby. I need to write that down.
Hot Bobby definitely wears a leather jacket. I'll tell you that much.
Yeah, he does. That's literally one of the first things in the piece.
Yeah.
Is that he? I think one of the first things I say is that he's always wearing a signature blue leather jacket.
Yeah.
And like a mid neck length fashion mullet, which is
okay.
Yeah. So those are the main things that I've been working on right now.
That's awesome. Well, hey, thanks so much for coming on the Last Writing podcast. And yeah, especially without having released any episodes, I really appreciate you agreeing to come on to something completely
Yeah,
blind.
yeah, for sure. It was super fun, and yeah, thanks for having me as one of the first people.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, hey, take care.
Yeah, you too. Okay,
All right.
catch you later, Adam.
Yeah, thanks a lot.